for indirect costs. My name is Joanne Carney. I'm the Chief Government Relations Officer here at AAAS. And today we're here to discuss the FAIR model for indirect costs, which was developed by JAG as a replacement for the current facilities and administrative costs model with substantial input from a broad range of higher education representatives. And though AAAS is not a member of JAG, we do support the process and its quick time frame. That's because the status quo is not tenable, and the cap on indirect costs that's being imposed by a number of agencies would be damaging to American science. And this is why we're hosting the webinar today, and your participation in this process is important, as are the questions you can share with the JAG subject matter expert team that have joined us today. Now, before we get started, would like to have a quick poll just to see how many of you that are on the call today, how familiar you are with the FAIR model. So there'll just be a little poll that you can participate in. Give it some time as people are joining. Okay, interesting. We've got the majority of the people here have heard about it or read about it some, but many of you don't know that much about it, but they're eager to learn, which is great. That's why we're hosting this webinar. And we know there can be a lot of questions. In fact, there will be a Q&A portion as part of today's event, and you'll be able to add your questions to the Q&A tab here at the bottom of the Zoom link anytime. And you can also upvote questions that you'd like to have answered. And the JAG team here with me today will try to answer as many questions as possible. This is a public event, so please be aware that media may be present. And for media, we also invite you to send questions for any kind of follow-up questions to an email, the following email, public-affairs@aau.edu. This webinar will be recorded and made available to the AAAS community. Now, with that out of the way, I have the pleasure of introducing Kelvin Drogemeyer, the chair of JAG, who is leading the deep dive today. Kelvin is a professor of atmospheric science and special advisor to the Chancellor of Science and Policy at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is a longtime science policy leader, having served in many federal science and policy leadership roles in the past, including on the National Science Board, where he served for years as vice chair and as director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 2019 to 2021. And we're very pleased to have Kelvin, as well as the numerous members of the JAG team joining us today. But before I turn it over to Kelvin, we do have a recorded remarks to share from AAAS CEO Sudip Parikh, who is unable to join us today. And then we'll turn directly to Kelvin and the JAG team. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sudip Parikh, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. And I'm so proud today that the AAAS can host this special virtual town hall for the research community. If you're seeing this video of me, it means that my plane hasn't landed in time for me to do the introduction live. I hope to join you as soon as I land. But in the meantime, Today we're going to take a deep dive into what is called the financial accountability in research, or FAIR model for indirect costs. Now, we're going to have the opportunity to learn more and, most importantly, to ask detailed questions about the FAIR model. The FAIR model is proposed to be a replacement for the current Facilities and Administrative Cost model, or F&A. Now, the model was developed by the Joint Associations Group on Indirect Costs. That's called JAG, a lot of acronyms here. Now, the JAG includes associations that represent public and private universities all over the country, independent research institutes, medical schools, and other interested stakeholders. Now, importantly for you to know, the AAAS is not a member of JAG. We are serving as a convening host for this discussion, but we don't have positions related to the specifics of these proposals. Now, that said, as someone who is deeply involved in discussions on science policy with Congress, the funding agencies, and the administration, I do have a few thoughts. First, the status quo just isn't tenable. Nobody is happy with it. Not Congress, not the administration, not the agencies, and not even a lot of universities and institutions. Second, without the scientific community and research institutions' input, the policies imposed by the Office of Management and Budget would be damaging to the American scientific enterprise. They would be damaging. Now, third, I've been impressed by the openness and the practicality of the JAG process. I wholeheartedly support that process and its quick time frame. Congress has given the community a very short amount of time to return with a recommendation that is more simple, more transparent, and more fair. Now, no resolution of this is going to be perfect, and no model is going to be loved by all of us. But the JAG process, chaired by Kelvin Drogemeyer, is the best vehicle I've seen to get to a practical, well-reasoned recommendation to Congress in the short time frame that is needed so that this proposal can be implemented in the upcoming appropriations process. Now, it's important to pressure test the FAIR model. We've got to pressure test it, make sure it's good. We've got to ask questions and even suggest changes. And it's incredibly important to come to a final recommendation quickly. If we don't, the policies imposed on us are going to be damaging, and none of us are going to be happy. Now, all that together is why we are hosting this town hall today at the AAAS. The JAG are hoping to provide details in a Q&A format, engage in a dialogue with the scientific community, and pressure test the model that they've developed. Again, the AAAS nor I have a position on the policy choices in the FAIR model. You should come to your own conclusions and help drive to the best possible outcome, but we have to get to an outcome. Now, with that, let me turn things over to our moderator and Kelvin Drogemeyer and senior members of the JAG subject matter expert team. Thanks for being with us.
So I'll go ahead and begin, Joanne. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And let me just add my thanks to everyone for taking time to attend here. Also to Sudip and the AAAS staff. They've done a marvelous job of putting this together. Sudip said it so beautifully. I won't even try to repeat anything he said. There's no need. So spot on in everything he said. And so really am grateful that you all are here today. And I think that poll was extraordinarily helpful to help guide me in terms of the kind of the quick setup here, because we want to have as much time as possible for the Q&A. I also want to thank the members of the subject matter expert team who are here today, taking yet more of their time as they have over the past 3+ months to work on this very important project. And I want to just begin by showing you the team here, the areas of expertise. We've had an extraordinary group of 26 individuals spanning all areas of research and institutions, academic institutions, HBCUs, F-score institutions, R1s, R2s, so on and so forth, but also independent research institutes and medical centers. We have academic affiliated hospitals. We have private foundations. This is not just a lot of academics talking about this. We have members of private foundations that fund research who've been a part of this team so that we can see things through a very different lens than what we typically do as academics. Also, former government agency officials. Today we have Gil Tran, who was at OMB for over 2 decades, who knows this really better than I think anyone, as well as folks from the DOE laboratory system, chief financial officers who, again, work in a very different environment. So bringing all these folks together, it was an extraordinary educational experience, and that's really how we came to this model. So this model we're going to talk about is a product of their hard work. Before we jump into it, though, and I'm going to do a very, very quick level set because we want to get to the questions, I want to show you a simple way of explaining the FAIR model, a way that I've used for members of Congress and other folks who don't live in the world we live in. And so I start with a traditional bill from a restaurant, the Acme Nonprofit Steak, Pizza, and Seafood Palace. Not exactly a place that I think we probably all want to eat at, but notice that it's nonprofit. That's a very important point here because we're not talking about profit. We are not profit-driven institutions. We're nonprofits in our research enterprise. But you get a bill like this and you look at it and you see, okay, I ordered all those things and I got them and my bill's $110, neglecting the tip. And you're like, does a steak really cost $56? No, it actually doesn't. When you look at a bill like this, you're paying for things other than what appears on your bill, right? You're paying for maybe the rent on the building, you're paying for the credit card system, you're paying for staff and laundry and maybe building security and HVAC and all these kinds of things. And you don't see that itemized on your bill, but I guarantee you're paying for it. So in a research grant, we do it in a very similar way, except we take the actual costs here, like the porterhouse is not $56, it actually costs $35. We put the true and actual costs on our research grants, and then we have this thing called indirect costs, which in this case, I just picked a number, 57% is the F&A rate. So you take the numbers in white, you add them up, you multiply them by 57%, that's equal to $40. You add the two together and you get the total bill. And that's how a research grant works. Well, what we've done in the FAIR model, in this concept of a restaurant bill, we've blown up the indirect costs into all the different things that you're actually paying for. And so, for example, there's a steak aging room, a brick oven pizza, and seafood tank. And those things, if you're ordering, say, a pizza, then you know exactly what it costs to use that brick oven to prepare your pizza and so on. But there are other costs like electricity and credit card system and so on that everybody pays. Now, if you're only getting a steak, you don't pay for the pizza oven. Oh, well, yeah, actually you do. Turns out you do in this model here. You pay for all of that plus all of these other costs that cannot be attributed directly to what you specifically ordered when you went to the restaurant. Still totals $110. Well, the thing that's kind of absurd about that is you look at that and you say, wait a second, I ordered a steak. I didn't order seafood. I didn't, why am I paying for that? Okay, so suppose you take those things off the bill. You say, you know what, I only want to pay for what I actually, use to prepare my meal. If you do that and you'd run the numbers, the total bill is $92. So you're not only paying less, you're actually knowing exactly what you're paying for, and you're not paying for things that you're not using. And that's the concept of the FAIR model, something we call the detailed option. I'll show you in the context of a simple grant here in just a moment. But it's sort of like an itemized tax form, where you're actually putting in your tax form all the different deductions that you have, very similar to what you see here. So let's take that final answer and say, well, wait a second, maybe I'm a small restaurant and I don't have the ability to, I've got like 6 employees. I don't have the ability to cost out a steak room and a pizza oven. I don't know what those things cost. I mean, I don't have the resources to do that. Well, okay. We have a simple option in the FAIR model where we actually say, all right, if you have certain kinds of things here that actually are directly attributed to your meal, but you don't have the resources to cost them out explicitly, we'll set it at a fixed rate of 10% based on a lot of analysis that we did so that your bill here is in fact 25% of the cost of the meal. You take the stuff in white, you multiply it by 25%, add it to the stuff in white, you get $93. Hey, that's pretty darn close to the itemized version as well. That's exactly how the FAIR model works. It makes everything explicit. It also allows you to know exactly what you're paying for. So the point here is that when you look at that particular model, indirect costs are not indirect at all. The restaurant can't provide you a steak if it doesn't have a room to age the steak in, assuming it's a good restaurant, right? And so, you cannot actually disaggregate the direct and the indirect costs. They go together. You can't sort of say, well, let's do one without the other. You really can't do that. You cannot do one without the other. And so these essential resources like the aging room and like the fish tank are appropriately charged to your bill if in fact that's what you order for your dinner. You also see everything you pay for right up front. You pay the actual costs. Nothing is hidden. You don't pay for things you don't use. And all costs are, of course, very auditable. When government comes to the company and says, okay, what are you charging? Okay, everything is auditable. And the interesting thing is, suppose that you don't have enough money for the facilities and those other costs. For example, the fish tank and electricity and so on. What do? You sort of have three options as a restaurateur. Number one, you can scale back the quality of what you're doing to cost less. Number two, you could reduce your menu, make fewer items and so on to reduce the cost, or you can go out of business. Sort of three choices there. And so the point is that if you start reducing one part of the budget, what we traditionally know as indirect costs, and say, well, let's just use money for more direct costs, it's sort of like saying, hey, we're going to give you a lot more money for pizza dough, but we're not going to give you the money for the toppings. Go out and sell as many pizzas as you can. And you're like, well, it's not a pizza, it's just a bunch of dough. So you can't disaggregate the direct and the indirect costs. That's the point. So let's look at this in a context of an actual grant that we're familiar with. This is our so-called detailed option within the FAIR model. This is all the things that you typically think of as direct costs, but the term direct costs and indirect costs, those are meaningless terms. So we call this research performance costs. It's the cost to perform the research, very simply. It's faculty salaries, it's grad student stipends, it's supplies, it's publication costs, it's travel, so on and so forth. Those are the actual costs to actually conduct the research, okay, to perform it. But you need other support things, just like in the restaurant, to support that research. You have to comply with regulations, you need facilities, you have to monitor your budget, you have to do reporting, all those kinds of things. And those are also project-specific costs, just like in your menu, in your bill rather, you have a cost directly related to your steak. If you don't have the aging room, you don't have a steak. Here, if you don't have these support costs, you're not going to be able to do the research up above. But there are, as in the restaurant example, some things that everybody has to pay for. They're not specific to any given project. They're attached to everything. And we have those as 15% of the budget. Now, what's important to recognize here is that this is not a rate. This is not an F&A rate. It's a percent of the total budget. So we get rid of this concept of, F&A rate, multiply it by the modified total direct costs and all that kind of craziness that causes confusion, where a 50% F&A rate means not 50% of the budget is indirect costs, it's 33% of the budget. That gets people very confused. We get rid of that. We say this cost is 15% of the budget, full stop. And so one of the things we want to talk to you about today are the items in the research, essential research performance support, ERPS. And I'm not going to detail them here, but they're the kinds of things that you would expect to see. Oh, my research project needs facilities. Oh, yeah, I actually have to have financial monitoring. I need to know what my budget is, how many months I can fund a student, and so on and so forth. We're a deep dive today. We want to dive into that to show you how you would actually do this operationally. And then finally, the GRO here, it represents, again, those costs that everyone has to pay for is 15%. And where'd that 15% come from? We analyzed data. We came to that conclusion that was about the right number. Now, the simple option, basically, like in the restaurant example, it's exactly the same as the detailed option, except we remove two things, the research performance facilities and the research information services. And we say, based on data and so on, that's 10% of the budget. And who would use this option? Well, it might be an R2 university, it might be an emerging university, it might be an HBCU or an MSI. They're not well enough resourced to have the administrative machinery to do all of those things. So what you essentially have here is 25% of your budget are the support costs, and the other costs are directly related to the actual research itself, or a few items up here like regulatory costs are in the performance support category as well. And that, in a nutshell, is the FAIR model right there. And so to recap it, we completely get rid of the F&A concept and the rate proposal negotiation. It accommodates all types and sizes of institution, helps facilitate growth of the smaller institutions that we want to see grow. It increases transparency and accountability, as I showed you there, and also in the restaurant example. It gets rid of confusion. I'm not going to talk about this, but how the reimbursed funds are used. This is a big, big concern and confusing point by members of Congress and a lot of other folks who don't understand how this works. We change that and we improve it to where these costs get returned to allocable categories. It's relative to the type of work being performed, the costs are. If you're doing English research or theoretical mathematics, you're using no facilities, you shouldn't be charged the same F&A rate as somebody that's doing medical research or somebody working in high-cost engineering areas. But yet we apply the same F&A rate to everybody right now, and that doesn't make sense in 2025. Accounts for geographic cost differentials. Again, the costs are whatever they are. If you're in the Northeast and the personnel and facility costs, electricity, whatever is more, well, you know exactly what those costs are. And they're maybe not as high in Oklahoma or Kansas. okay, you actually put the actual costs in there, you know what the cost differentials are. And so it accounts for that automatically. Regulatory compliance, 270 new and modified regulations have been put on universities in the last 34 years with no new federal money. So we actually put that in the cost because we have to comply, in some cases by law, in some cases by policy, with these things. There's been no new money to do that. For that reason, we subsidize federal research by about $7 billion a year. Private foundation, the structure is very similar to them. In fact, if you look at, say, the Gates Foundation, and they allow a lot of direct charging of things that are not allowed by the federal government in terms of their funding, we look much more in the FAIR model like a private foundation. And this comparison is something you hear a lot of. Why are you not more like foundations? This model does that basically automatically. It just fell out of it. And it will require certain changes to things like salary caps and the uniform guidance. So as Joanne mentioned, there is a document that has been prepared. It's going through approval process now that will go into a written deep dive of all of this stuff. We want to have a dialogue today with you about it, but Kurt Merrick has taken the lead in developing this from Sanford Burnham Prebys out in California. It's extraordinarily well done, and this will give you a chance to really dive deeply into the weeds of how to do a lot of these things. But we want to say right up front and caution you that we don't know what's going to be implemented. So we don't suggest that you go spend a lot of time putting things in place here, but spend time learning more about the model and asking questions about it. And that's why we want your input. So one of the things we hear a lot of is this going to save the government money or is it going to cost the government more? And that was not ours to answer. Ours was to develop a model that shows the actual cost of research, both performing the research and enabling the performance of the research. It is really up to the government and to Congress and the White House to decide what the government should pay for. That's really up to them. And we've made the conversation possible to say, okay, here's what it actually costs. These are the real costs that institutions have to bear doing government-funded research. Let's have that conversation about the government, what the government feels is appropriate to be funded by the government. Just a quick thing to show you, we have some good endorsements out there. David Brenner, Dr. Brenner, who's the president of Sanford Burnham Prebys, said this model is brilliant in scope and simplicity. That's a really wonderful statement. We make these slides available to you. You can go look at the document. Also, the chancellor of WashU and the Washington University in St. Louis had a statement that came out that said he believes the model will meet the administrative goals of transparency and accountability and help us be, continue to be responsible stewards of taxpayer funds. That's really important. Political article came out just this weekend. I think the important point is that last line there where Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Bhattacharya, head of NIH, said he thinks that our model is quite promising. I've talked to him about it, and I think that's a very important point to be made. So the next steps, where are we headed? We'll be happy to answer any questions you have about what we're doing with working with Congress and OMB. We have this session, thankfully, to AAAS. We've got one coming up Friday for the COGR membership and a week from Friday for the APLU membership, and another AAAS meeting a week from today, town hall, where we're going to do exactly what we're going to do today. We want to make sure we get your input, we answer your questions, and we know what you're thinking, and you can continue to be helpful because the model we arrived at was done with tremendous community input and thoughtful guidance, and that was incredibly helpful. We have provided House and Senate bill language. We can talk about that. The guide, as I mentioned, will be available soon. And one of the points that our JAG association presidents say a lot about is that we have to stay united as a community. If we start to fracture, we're going to, as Sudip says, get a model that is not going to be good for the future of the United States of America and our research enterprise and our global position in science and technology leadership. So we do need and welcome your support for the FAIR model. But as Sudip said, not everybody's going to like it. It's not a perfect model. There is no such perfect model, but I think it's so important that we try to stay united. So I'll put up this QR code for you here, and you can get the web address, I think, as well from AAAS. There's all kinds of resources on the page here, and we'll add that guide that Kurt and his team have developed. And so you can get all kinds of things. You can slide sets and videos and all the things that we've done up to now. So that's my stage setting slides. I hope that's useful. The survey said that a lot of folks maybe hadn't really heard much about the FAIR model. So hopefully this gives you a glimpse into it, but we really would love to dive deeply. And no question is inappropriate. Any question you have, we'll do our best to answer it. So we do have a set of questions that we'd like to put up here that we hear a lot about, and we thought it might be good for the SME team who's here. And I'm going to shut up in a minute and turn it over to them because they're really the experts on this. To kind of go through this and show you, talk about some of the answers to these questions we hear a lot about, and we do think there are points of confusion in the community, understandably so. This is new. It's going to be a change, whatever happens. But as Sudip said, a change is coming. Whether it's this model or something else, we better be prepared for it. So with that, Joanne, thank you so much for the opportunity to share the slides. And I'll go ahead, if it's okay, and leave this up here and then turn it back over to you, Joanne, for the kind of going through these questions with the team, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelvin. I appreciate it. We are getting many questions in the Q&A tab, and keep those coming. But first, I'd like to ask all of the subject matter the team members of JAG to join us on camera as well. We have a numerous of them participants here. And maybe just to kick off, if to give you each an opportunity, maybe answer one of the questions that Kelvin has already posted. And since I did not have, there's so many of you, too many to introduce, if you just introduce yourself. So for the first question, in terms of less money be available for research, I've seen that also in other cases, that there's a concern that there'll be less money for the actual research versus other costs.
So I'll take that. Nancy Andrews, I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer at Boston Children's Hospital. The amount of money isn't going to change. I think there's already an issue, at least with the NIH grants, which are what I know the best, that the size of a grant hasn't changed in many years. And that's a separate problem. It no longer fully pays for the work that needs to be done. But this model isn't going to change that. It still requires that all of the money necessary for research come in with most likely a continuing university subsidy, as has been true for a long time. It's just putting it in a way that is more transparent and more easy to understand, and allocating the cost to the research that's being done, and not doing it just by percentage.
Okay, and another question you have here on the list that I've seen, because there are other people that had questions related to calculating costs, like related to clinical trials, for example. So will the FAIR model fully support the cost of research for institutions like hospitals and independent research institutes that currently have higher indirect rates than other institutes?
I can take this one. My name is Kurt Merrick. I'm the Chief Research Development Officer at Sanford Burnham Prebys, which is a small nonprofit research institute in La Jolla, California. So we are one such institution that has a higher indirect rate, and the members of the subject matter expert team included people from institutions like ours, as well as hospitals and medical centers, small institutions, minority serving institutions. And we really strive to ensure that all the institutions would have the opportunity to include the actual costs that they bear in performing research on behalf of the American people. So the way the model is put together, and as Kelvin discussed with the analogy to a restaurant bill, it does allow you to include your actual cost specific to the different projects that you're proposing. And that's really important. So biomedical research proposals will include more and different line items than an economics research project. So for medical research, you might have human subjects, you might have animal subjects, and you need to include the regulatory costs associated with those. And so the model absolutely takes that into account to ensure that the different types of institutions institutions in different geographic locations will be able to recover the costs associated with their research project.
Thank you. And then let me, in terms of this list, I'm going to ask the number 7, the types of research other than biomedical research, because biomedical is one of the largest portions of obviously the non-defense discretionary portion of the research and development budget. But how does this impact? How will this be received in terms of other disciplines? How will they be adequately supported? Like if you're in nuclear or national security, social science, agriculture, et cetera.
I might jump in to answer that one. I'm Nick Wigginton. I'm Associate Vice Provost for Research at Johns Hopkins. Kurt already started to answer that a little bit, and that, this is adaptable to cover the variable costs and activities associated with each project, depending on what it needs. And so if it's biomedical, if it's social sciences, if it's humanities, if they have specialized costs that are associated with the project, then and the institution sort of builds a system to support those costs, then it will absolutely cover that. And I guess another part to this, and I think Calvin touched on it a little bit, is that this is meant to be applied to every federal agency. And so it's not just an NIH thing that would fund federal biomedical research, but in principle, and again, the devil will be in the details about how it's implemented, but in principle, it would apply to the National Endowment for the Humanities, it would apply to NSF, it would apply to USDA, and that, again, inherently would cover lots of different types of research across many disciplines.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And then we also received some questions related to number 3 about having to start from scratch in determining space and facility costs. And I think that there's some that express questions about having to calculate administrative burden, but also just transitioning into this new model where you in many cases will have to be managing 2 models because you might have some grants with the current indirect costs, F&A costs versus this new model. So if someone could address that.
Yes, I can, Joanne, I can address that. My name is Gilbert Tran. I'm with, like Dr. Kevin Dromai said, I was 27 years at OMB, so I know the uniform guidance pretty well, and also have done some indirect cost proposal review as well as part of the cost allocation service at HHS. This question comes up a lot. I do agree. People are afraid that, with the FAIR model, especially the detail option, you have to have some kind of different, space and do away with the current the space of facility cost determination, right now, and that is not correct. First of all, if you use a simple option with, you don't have to do any kind of space at all. It's going to be all lumped up, the space and the performance facility and the SRI, I'm sorry, the information services going to be like the 10%. You don't have to do any space at all. But for the detail option, you can basically use the current space survey system that you're using for your current costs and build on that, because the current space already allocate the cost to organized research. And so now, if you just want to do organized research and instruction, you already have that system to do that. If you want to be more sophisticated, I think Nick just answered question number 7, where you list out all type of research in there: aerospace, nuclear, biomedical, social science. There's a possibility there based on the type of lab or office that you use. You can have different using your current space survey to allocate the cost down to that type of lab and develop the rate for it.
If I could just piggyback off what Gil said, which is exactly right. When we first rolled out the 2 provisional models, we called them bookends. We had a very detailed model number 2, that had a lot of space allocation in there about square footage and things like that. And we realized, and the community certainly reinforced that model was just untenable. So what we did was we said, okay, we'll do this as a percentage of the actual budget. So if you go back and look at the slides that I showed, I think I can do this real quick. You'll see that in this part of the budget here, in the detailed model on the left, you'll see that the facilities are a percent of the budget. They're not a dollar amount. So the idea here is that you would have institutions come up with their own categories of facilities, like say office space, a dry lab, a wet lab. Maybe they have a clean room or a bunch of clean rooms or whatever, any kind of facility, biosafety lab, whatever categories, and they would be auditable, but they would fit the institution. And then they would do this actually looking at data over, say, a year or two, which they have, as Gil said, to look at the cost of facilities and then just do this as a percentage of the budget. You're not going in and measuring square feet or saying how many people are in this lab, shared space, all that kind of stuff. We took care of all that in the analysis of doing the way that you actually allocate the space. And it, of course, was the most difficult, vexing thing. The rest of them are fairly straightforward, but boy, space, that's a real challenge. And so other folks like Kurt and others may want to comment on that, because this is something that's really, really critically important. I think vexes a lot of people. It's like, oh my God, how are we possibly going to do this? And to build off of the point that was said earlier, we are proposing a 2-year time frame where we would stay with the current model and institutions would prepare for the new model, which after 2 years would then come into existence and come into play. It wouldn't be a ramp into it. It would be 2 years of preparation, and then you flip the switch and the new model becomes active. So Kurt, I didn't know if you or others wanted to opine a little bit more, but we probably ought to talk a little bit more about how the facility part is done, because that really, I think, is a great point of concern, understandably so, for the community, and a point of confusion as well.
They're happy to address that, Kelvin. So this is one of the more difficult aspects of the model to really understand. Many people, most people that are touching indirect costs in some way don't really understand how the current F or facilities rate is determined. It goes through a very lengthy process with a space evaluation to determine what's allocable and allowable, to come up with the percentage that's used now and put on the budgets. What we're proposing with the FAIR model is that something similar, although less complex because it doesn't involve any negotiations with the government, would be done on some regular basis, perhaps every 2 years, every 5 years, where you would identify the different types of space on your campus. Many institutions already know what type of space every room in every building is. You would identify the types of research that are done in that space, which is already generally done. And then you would identify the up to the 6 most common types of research that you conduct at your institution. So it may be 1 if you're small and focused on one type of research, like our institution is. We only do biomedical research. It may be 6 if you're a large university, R1 university. But that would cover the most common types of research. And then for the project budgets, the investigator and the sponsored projects office would identify the predominant type of research for that research project, and the appropriate percentage would be applied for the type of space that is commonly used for that type of research. So the actual development of the budget when you're submitting an application wouldn't really be that much more onerous. You would simply have to identify that type of research and apply the correct percentage. And the development of those percentages will be very similar to what it is now, minus the complexity of having to negotiate with the government. So we don't think this will be that much more challenging, if more challenging at all, than the current model. However, we do recognize that it will take some time for institutions to get this up and running, which is why we propose the 2-year transition period. We are currently developing 2 spreadsheets. The first one will give institutions the ability to start estimating what the percentages for different types of research would be based upon their own analyses that they've mostly already done with their space surveys. And that'll give people the opportunity to do a high level analysis and then a high level estimate to compare what individual project budgets would look like under the current F&A model, under the detailed option of the FAIR model, and under the simple option of the FAIR model. So you can start to get a sense of, for different types of research on your campus, which option might be more appropriate for you. And then the second spreadsheet is a much more detailed template to that can be used by the facilities and the cost accounting folks at your institutions to really start putting flesh on the bone for what your percentages for different types of research facilities would be. And that'll be a much more detailed document. So that may be coming a little bit later than the first one I mentioned.
And to underscore an important point that Kurt mentioned, and Kurt, thank you for that, is the fact that you would do this every few years. And so it's a lookup table essentially. And so you're not saying, okay, this person is submitting this grant proposal. Now we have to figure out all these things. No, you just go to a lookup table and say, okay, as Kurt said, you're doing this type of work. Here's the lookup. You put it in there. You're done. And so it's very simple. Once it's in place, maintaining it is relatively simple. But we're not at all suggesting it's not going to be any work to put it in place, as Kurt said. But once it's there and once the system is in place, you just maintain it and using the same types of process you already have now.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, now we're going to shift to the many questions that have been posted by the participants here on this webinar. And I'm going to start off with one by Jennifer Leck that has been upvoted numerous times by others. And you knew I was going to ask this question as well. But this is related to the recent executive order on improving oversight on federal grant making, which does include language that federal agencies should give preference to institutions with lower indirect costs. Now, this JAG FAIR model has came out months before this executive order. How do you see this kind of impacting the FAIR model? And even if the FAIR model is being utilized, the government may continue to choose to award grants with proposals with lower indirect costs. And maybe you could also kind of include maybe a little discussion, elaborate a little bit more in terms of your conversations with OMB and with Congress that you kind of touched upon earlier. Who would like to start?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So, obviously when you submit a grant proposal, the quality of the research, the ability of the investigators to complete it, the quality of the ideas, the innovation, all those kinds of things are obviously extremely important. And regardless of what agency you look at, whether it's NSF and intellectual merit or whatever, we think that I think everyone agrees that the merit and the ability to be successful and the boldness of the thinking are very, very important. And so I think that the FAIR model, what it does, it basically says, okay, these are the actual costs. I think we have to be very careful and program officers already do this. They do look at budgets, but budgets are not typically, and I've told this to faculty for years, you don't typically make an award decision based upon the budget. It's based upon all the other factors. And then you see, well, is the budget appropriate to support the kind of work that's done? So I think we have to be very careful about sort of the giving it to the lowest bidder, that kind of thing. We have an extraordinary research enterprise in our country here. We have large institutions, small, we have very well resourced and so on. And frankly, there are a lot of programs like EPSCoR and others that have been around for many decades to help lift institutions up and help them grow and develop new capabilities and so on. I think we have to realize that we want to be strong all across the board. And so when we have institutions that have extraordinary capabilities, they're doing cutting edge research, I don't think we want to disadvantage them or harm them in some way and have others grow at their expense. I think we want to have the entirety of the American research enterprise be as strong as it can be, which includes the industry, the academia, government, and nonprofits. They're a very unique American experiment, this four-sector enterprise that has made us the world leader. So I think we want to certainly make sure that we know what the costs are and that they're legitimate, they're on the table. And again, the government to decide what it wants to pay for and how it wants to do all that. But I think we all feel that there needs to be a balance here of the cost of the research, the opportunity for success, and the type of work that's being done. And all, I can tell you when I was at the White House, and I knew this before, you go visit a lot of institutions that are small and so on, you find extraordinary capabilities in our country where you would really least expect to see them. So there's wonderful work going on everywhere. And I don't think we need to get into, the us versus them kind of thing. I think we need to make sure that we're making thoughtful decisions to make sure that we as a nation are as strong as possible. And I think that means everybody at the table, everybody working, everybody doing leading edge research. And that's what I think the FAIR model enables: thoughtful decisions based upon the actual cost, the known costs, and use that as a tool, but not as the only tool.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, another question. This one is by Steve Smith. That kind of is going back to the current F&A model that is being used, not the FAIR model. That kind of implies that there's something wrong with the current F&A model, that it's unfair. So have universities kind of assessed kind of what is the evidence about whether or not it has been fair? And did they address it? Oh, it keeps moving around, excuse me. And did the institutions kind of analyze or assess that? And why, there's a concern about about endorsing this model rather than trying to better advocate or better explain the current model.
Yeah, I'll take that because a lot of us have been involved in this for a long, long time. And back in 2017, I testified before Labor Approps when the 10% cap was proposed for NIH. And that was the very first question that we asked. And number one, I will tell you, nothing is horribly flawed with the F&A model. It has its limitations, but it's been serving us well for a long, long time. But it does have some challenges that make it difficult for people to understand. There's some issues of, just sort of not transparent. I mean, the process is very transparent and accountable, but at the end of the day, people still misunderstand big parts of it. And so when we came into this, we said, well, can't we just do what we've been doing for a long, long time, is just keep explaining that this model, it's okay, And the answer we got from Congress and others was no. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a good model. Change is happening, and you either can embrace the fact that change is happening, or you can just sort of, put your head in the sand and accept whatever comes down the pike. And so people ask the question, well, why are we even doing this? Why don't we just wait and see what happens? Well, the wait and see is not a good approach here. It's not a good strategy. And the current F&A model, if it's capped at 15%, or some type of 15% thing is done, it's going to be very, very problematic for us. So that was the first question we asked, is what are we trying to do here? And can't we just keep going? And the answer was absolutely not. No question about it, full stop. Everybody told us that. So, we wouldn't, as Matt Owens will say, we didn't choose to do this now or under the time pressure that we're under, but that's reality. That's the world in which we're living. And so we saw it as an opportunity. I said, okay, there's a forcing function out here called caps on F&A. Let's actually take this as an opportunity to not have to keep coming back to this every 5 or 6 years. This started in the 40s, 1946, 48, 58 was when Congress first started putting caps on indirect costs. This problem has not gone away. And we think that if we come up with a better model that's appropriate for 2025, that we can do something that's going to have some longevity and robustness and have some durability. So we're not going to have to keep doing this and upsetting the research enterprise. A lot of changes are happening now, even though the caps haven't been put in place yet, they're still being litigated. Lots and lots of changes are happening. So we want an America that is strong and leading the world. And we feel like this time is now the right time to go ahead and do that. So it's a great question. We get it a lot of times. And that would be the answer that I have. Now, other folks on the team have different perspectives, I think, not disagreeing, but maybe would have some different views on that. But that's basically where we've been.
Calvin, I would just add, I completely agree with what you said. And something that we haven't said explicitly yet is that universities have, or I'm going to say universities, I'm actually at a hospital, but these institutions have assumed a lot of the risk and the fixed costs. So the institutions already have the space, they already have a lot of the people, they have the infrastructure. And what the government is doing by adding both the direct, what were formerly the direct costs and what are the additional real costs, it's incremental. It's just adding a bit more to take advantage of those things that the universities already have in place. And I think that gets forgotten a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Okay, this is a different question, somewhat philosophical, from Reba. This is about whether or not you discussed kind of considering as you were developing this model, like changing the balance of the costs that should go directly to the institution versus what's paid for the government. And the example that's being used, there is, for example, should more of the cost of a physical plant, like whether building, utilities, or maintenance, should be covered by the institution versus the federal government, because the government is kind of investing in these other intangible research outcomes.
So I can try to start there. I'm Stacy Patterson. I'm the Vice President for Research at Florida State University. I think it's really what the FAIR model has tried to do is to lay out the actual cost of what it costs to do the research. And there's not a really easy way for that to shift. It is what it is. And so I think what we've tried to do is to be relatively silent on who pays for those costs or how that is treated but really lay out a model that really demonstrates the cost. But someone has to pay for that to be able to conduct the research. So either I think it's a discussion that people need to have is to who is responsible for innovation and building an innovation economy in our country and maintaining our competitive edge on a global front. And so as I think Nancy, you mentioned, our institutions are already taking a lot of risk in terms of we've got a lot of facilities, but I can say for my own institution, we're contributing 25 to 35 cents on every dollar on top of the F&A that we were earning to be able to conduct the research in a safe, secure, and ethical manner.
Anyone, any other team members would like to add to that?
Well, just going back to what I said in the slides, that the FAIR model makes exactly what Stacy was talking about possible. That conversation can happen because now you know what the actual costs are. So when you think about what the government should pay, what others should, the institution, so on and so forth, we can now have that conversation. It's really not for us to do, as Stacy said. We didn't really feel that was our job, but this is what, when we're talking with members of Congress, and I didn't really answer that other part of that question, but we are having very productive conversations with senators on both sides of the aisle. It's a bipartisan issue, House members as well, and so they understand it. They're getting this, and they get that their role is really to decide what that question was about, of what should the division of responsibility be in costs. And it goes back to this issue that if you say, well, let's put more money toward the actual conduct of research itself and less toward the support, you can't disentangle them. There's a consequence for that. And it's a question like in the restaurant example. Does it decrease the amount, the volume, the quality? Does it cause some to stop doing certain kinds of research? So I think this false dichotomy of indirect and direct can be separated. They can't, and we've shown that. And that's been kind of propagated for years and years and years. And I think it's very clear now that you can't do that. There are some costs that you just can't attribute to a given project, as we talked about, but they're far smaller than the ones that you can. So I think if there's anything people take away from this conversation about the FAIR model, it's the fact that the support needed to do research goes right along with the conduct of the research itself for the most part. And there's a residual in there that's 15% in our model that we feel is very reasonable and doable based on the modeling we've done of it. So hopefully that does help bring a little clarity, but it's a wonderful question and one that we get a lot. And hopefully this brings some clarity to that good question.
Right.
I'd add to that in addition to Stacy's point that institutions contribute 25 or 30 cents on the dollar to the research they perform, what federally funded research really is. It is an investment by the American people through the US government on the leadership of the US economy and innovation. And the result is $2.50 for every dollar invested. So it really is the thing that drives our economy, our technological leadership, and our diplomatic leadership. And so if the government wants to continue doing that, we're putting the actual costs of doing it on the table, so we can have a conversation with who should pay which parts of it.
Well said. Okay, now I'm going to go back into a little bit more technical again. This one's a question by Jim Olfsted that also had a lot of votes. So could you please comment on changes in administrative burden for the FAIR model? For instance, having to assess each individual project with the additional details of what that specific project needs seems to add to the administrative burden for each project, as opposed to just using a single, however imperfect, number that doesn't require a detailed analysis by a PI and their institution.
So I can take that one just because I've been working on some budget examples for the last week. So it is true. There are now more cost categories on a budget proposal. There are more line items. There are exactly 4 more cost categories. But it's important to remember that we already do this today. So I've overseen sponsor projects offices for quite a few years now, and we already look up the salaries of researchers. We already look up the cage costs for mice. We already look up the costs of supplies and travel and publications and ADP computer services. This will be very similar. There will simply be more things to look up, but it's not that much more. We're talking, how much does it cost for an animal protocol? Well, you'll have that available to you. You can just find it. If the grant requires animals, you can look up how much an animal protocol costs. You'll be able to look up the amount that it costs for library services, or if there's some very specialized facility like a laser facility or high performance computing, those rates are already included in many cases through service centers and core resource charges. And so it'll be the same methodology that we currently use when you're actually submitting the grant.
And I think it's fair to say that that the workload that's the reason we've proposed the 2-year implementation, because the workload is significant on the front end for all institutions actually to come up with these rates that people can then look up. But you will have them for your institution, not on a per proposal basis. It would be for your institution, just like your F&A rate is today, specific for your institution. So I do think there's a startup period for this, and some change is hard no matter what it is. And so, but I think after that initial implementation, I agree with Kurt that I don't think it's much, if any, more administrative burden after you have the initial implementation for your institution. And there will be systems that will have to change, right? Too, the way that we're approaching the way that we implement things into our systems will have to change as well.
And if Matt, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gil.
I was just going to add to that, you cannot also overlook that, there's a simple option that basically, you get your 15% for of total budget, not 15% of total cost or of total direct costs or MTDC, modified total direct costs. Well, for the general research operation, so you got 15% there. Under the simple option, then you have another 10% of the total budget that would cover any related facility and also the Research Information Services, RIS. That's I mispronounced last time. So basically, you only have two specific research support costs that you have to make determination, develop the rate for that. That would be the regulatory compliance and the award monitoring and oversight reporting and more. Now, somebody have questioned before on other seminar, why are we leaving that and not also have another fixed rate for it? And the reason that this team of JACs come up with is that we should not have a fix on that, because over time, based on the experience, the research regulatory compliance have grown. We don't have to pop, and that's the area that's probably going to grow, and a fixed rate for that area is not going to do justice for the level of support that we're going to need in the future. So do not forget that we do have a simple option if you don't want to get into developing rate for all the four components.
I would just add, if Matt Owens were here, the president of the Council on Governmental Relations, he would say, as he often does, he said, it's the cost of doing business. This kind of transparency and accountability doesn't come at no cost. And there is a startup cost. It's going to be not insignificant for sure. But I think if you look at the advantages of having a model like this that brings stability to the research enterprise, it brings accountability, and it brings trust. The government academic and independent research institute framework that we've had for decades since World War II is built on a notion of trust and mutual benefit. As Kurt was saying, research funded by the government is a public good. There's public benefit to that, and that is not as strong as it could be and needs to be. So I think one of the things is we felt that one of the goals we had here was to try to reinvigorate that trust of the research enterprise with the government, saying that yes, we are being accountable. Yes, we are subsidizing. Yes, we are doing these things, but we do it because we believe in the future of the country and the strength of American leadership in science and technology. And that's why, to Stacy's point, we spend that 30 cents on a dollar to do the research. But there's only so far you can go with that. And so I think reinvigorating that partnership, I think, is really, really important to think about here. And also, again, that the alternatives to this model or models similar to it are very, very challenging to think about for the future of the country and our research institutions.
Speaking of partnerships, I'm going to kind of go to two different questions that have been posed. One very early on of the webinar, and asked about representation of institutions, and kind of what kind of representations did you have that are not institutions that are like AAU, APLU, at AAMC?
I don't have the full list of the JAG organizations in front of me, but together, I mean, I think they must represent several hundred institutions. I mean, APLU, for example, is an incredibly diverse organization with an incredibly diverse set of institutions it represents. It's not just R1s, it's not just land grants. There's regional publics from all across the country. And then COGR, likewise, is an organization that represents many additional types of organizations that aren't in either of those organizations. So, and similarly, there's a group, and I forget the acronym. Kurt may have to remind me, that represents independent research institutions,
IRI.
IRIs.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think you had HBCUs also.
We did.
Yeah.
And a national lab and a philanthropic organization.
As well as an EPSCoR jurisdiction.
Three EPSCoR jurisdictions, 3 or 4 EPSCoR jurisdictions. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and the 10 JAG associations, like it said, Nick, they have very, very broad representation, but we also have the American Council on Education. That's huge. And we also have a lot of organizations that came to us sort of mid-process and said, hey, could we be a part of it? I said, well, we don't want to grow it too big, but we want to have you involved. So we have this other list there that we involve them and send them things as they're being developed and so on, including a lot of HBCUs and so on. And so we feel like we've really hit the very broadest cross section, small public, primarily undergraduate PUIs, and all these different types of institutions, R2s, R3s. They're all represented on this group. And if we didn't have somebody in a particular area, Like we didn't have anyone from an Indian, a Native American institution or tribal college or university. We didn't have anybody from there. But a lot of us have worked with them, so we couldn't have a group be 50 people, nor did we want to have it be 10. So I think we kind of hit the sweet spot. But we worked really, really hard to make sure that all points of view were considered for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna now switch gears again in terms of different perspectives. And this is this is the perspective from being a program officer. This is a question from Jay Zawinski, who's retired from the DOE Office of Science. He was a program manager overseeing proposals and grants, and for him, from his perspective, it was clear that F&A rates did not correspond to the costs, and that the change certainly makes sense. But if he understands correctly, each proposal, will have its own set of itemized costs, and so it might be difficult for reviewers and for the programs that are reviewing to better understand kind of what these costs are going to be. And so, just want to understand how did you all consider that what you're proposing, how these program officers are going to be reviewing these costs? Kind of how are you addressing that when it comes from engaging with agency program officers?
So I'm Jenny Lodge at Duke University. I'm the vice president for research and innovation there. And I think when we talked about these kinds of things, we talked about that there's got to be a reasonableness factor in here. That reviewers of grants already review direct cost budgets for reasonableness. There's going to be, they're going to be seeing proposals from many different institutions. And so when there will be some data available to them in terms of and information available to them to determine whether or not the costs that are being put in here are actually reasonable.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and we really haven't talked much about auditing, and Gil can talk about this and other folks that are on from the SME team, but we thought very, very carefully about the auditability and the allocability of these kinds of things. And I don't know if Cindy, you'd want to opine on that as well, because you've been in the thick of a lot of different things, not as an auditor, but that the auditing issue was a very important thing because if you set up a structure here, it has to be auditable and you've got to be able to justify and so on. So I think if somebody wants to speak to that, I think that would be a helpful thing to kind of put on the table as a point in addition to one that was just made.
I can go ahead and get started on that, Kevin. And the thought that this concept is first of all, one of the question is one of the earlier question is there going to be any more rate negotiation? And the answer is no. Under this model, there will be no rate negotiation. Perhaps some type of review by the federal government on certain type of item. But the current process now for the single audit will cover any type of cost. Your salaries and wage, can be audited. Your travel can be audited. Your equipment, how it's used, and so on and so forth can be cast. So we anticipate that with this concept, everything's going to be charged, down to the project level, and everything going to be atomized. If you all go with the details, option, then it's going to be covered under a single audit as any other type of cost. That also any cost on projects, can be reviewed by the agency at any time, in addition to the single audit. So if you have a big projects, the federal government, NSF, HHS, the energy can go in and review that particular projects, and at that time they can also review all the costs that that was charged to the government.
And back to the point, thank you, Gil, and back to the point about the workload. When we thought about this model, we didn't have an agency program officer on there because government officials really couldn't be. It'd become a FACA committee and the whole thing would change.
Right.
Very, very difficult. So but we did think about that. I was on the science board for 12 years. I've worked with a lot of folks, agency heads and so on, and we all kind of know that space. So there absolutely will be some changes needed in agencies. No question about that. The other point is the administrative workload. We talked about that earlier. There is an effort underway that I'm blessed to be a part of in the National Academies, a very fast-track committee that's actually finished its draft report literally today. We finalize it, and it's going for review to look at policy concepts and ideas for reducing administrative workload in research across the board. And so we felt that that was not in our scope because research workload is much broader than just the stuff we're talking about here, but there certainly is an element of that here. So I just want to let folks know that the part of the thing that I talked with Marcia McNutt about as I was on that committee as well, I could be kind of the crosstalk person between what we're doing here in the JAG and that committee to make sure that we're kind of in sync about the administrative workload issue. And so we have high hopes that we can have substantial reduction of the administrative workload through this other mechanism that would hopefully offset a little bit some of the the workload here. But as Stacy and others have said, we really think that the workload is going to be sort of in that setting up phase. And once you go into steady state and you just continue it along, we don't think it's going to be any more onerous than what you actually already have now.
Thank you. Okay, another question a little more on the technical side on calculation. So how are the costs of IT infrastructure, data collection and analysis software accounted for in a FAIR model? Anyone?
Well, so I think it depends. I think that that if these are project specific, they can be direct costed, but if not, if I recall, a lot of the IT costs we considered were part of the GRO, which is the general research operations, the 15% of total cost. And so because if it's just general, that's where we tried to keep that within that category.
And I think in some cases they might come under the information systems as well, in some cases.
They could.
Okay, because there were some other related questions about just general infrastructure, seeing it as general versus a more data intensive project. How do you go about you have to go about calculating that. Thank you. Let's see. Another question somewhat related to this it's somewhat philosophical, but the original concept of indirect cost was to build research capacity. So you're like willing to make these investments to advance the capacity of the research community, including areas like computational infrastructure. So how do you see this new FAIR, this more upfront model kind of changing this relationship about with the government in terms of kind of building research capacity and the investments that the government makes? This is why Jerry Cohen.
Well, I'll just say I don't know that it has any profoundly different impact than the current model we have, other than just to make things very, very transparent and obvious. I think one thing we did talk about, suppose you're doing a procurement of a $2 million piece of equipment or something like that, some of these things we have to be really careful how you apply them and think about them. And so there are, and again, in the weeds, a deep dive that we're doing today, there are some interesting things that others could talk about, maybe in more detail than I can, but there are some special kinds of cases that might need certain kinds of considerations, maybe some limits or whatever, to make this actually work. It's sort of like, de minimis limit on equipment right now of some value or whatever. Those kinds of things that wouldn't make sense if you just have a percentage based on the cost of the actual $5 million piece of equipment or something like that. So I don't know if others want to kind of expand on that. I think it's an important point to maybe talk about.
I think too, as you develop, as institutions have special facilities, the FAIR model allows for you to have multiple facilities kinds of rates that are applied. And so I think that allows for the support of these special kinds of infrastructure or unique facilities that only exist at a few or maybe just one institution.
Do you have anything in mind there, Stacy?
Yeah.
They have this National Magnetic High Magnetic Field Laboratory, I think is what it is. It's
Yes.
an NSF
Yeah.
funded facility, that so-called Mag Lab, and it's an extraordinary facility, and it's the only one of its kind, or few
In
of
the
it
US, for
in the
sure.
U.S. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's really an amazing thing, and she's right. And there are maybe other examples of wind tunnels or certain other kinds of facilities that are very unique, and so again, you're treating that facility in an appropriate way now, because it's a very high cost facility in the sense that you don't have thousands of people using it. You maybe have 100, or maybe like a telescope or something. So this model just, like I said, it's a common sense approach that if you're going to use that facility, here's what it costs to maintain it. The institution puts money in, NSF puts money in, the government puts money in. It's a shared value proposition. And that's really what we always try to think about.
Thank you. Okay, now this is a question also with respect to kind of the impact impact like on rural universities or smaller institutions versus institutions that may have a lot more personnel, people at hand. So they're, asking, especially for your universities, they often have to invest more in like recruitment and participant travel and outreach for research projects simply due to their geography. So how will rural public universities be supported during this transition of the FAIR model?
Well, again, I would say that the FAIR model allows you to recoup your cost, your specific costs. So your rates that you will develop, I hate to use that word rate, I shouldn't have used it. Your recharge center cost, or however your model is going to work will be based on your actual costs. So this was designed to make sure that actual cost geography was taken into account, or higher cost of travel to different places, and those kinds of things could be taken into account.
Yeah, and in terms of preparing for the transition, in that 2 year period, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that the government might fund some support to do that. We have the granted program at NSF, the Growing Research Access for Nationally Transformative Economic Development.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
Kelvin froze. Anyone know where he was going on that?
Not exactly.
There are funding programs that exist like granted at NSF that are explicitly designed to build up capacity at emerging research institutions. I think
Right.
that's what Calvin was talking about.
Okay, thank you. Well, hopefully he'll come back. We'll move on to another question. So this one was by Wendy Rogers, that also had a lot of votes on this one. And so how does this support central services like grants management teams, grant accounting, and offices of sponsored programs? How would this support, oh, I've lost her now. So how would that go about supporting those? That's kind of related to the IT. There are all these different functions that this would
So
involve.
when we were developing the cost, the different categories of cost, we said that you could direct charge, or you'd have regulatory costs, you could have these award management and reporting costs. So that's your post award that you could cost that. But pre-award types of costs would, because you can't specifically assign it to an award or a project, it's kind of before the fact, that's part of GRO.
Thank you.
Could I come back, Joanne, to that? Sorry,
Sure.
the whole thing just died.
Welcome back, Kelvin.
Thank you. So in terms of the transition, there is this program at NSF I mentioned, granted, that basically funded institutions if they were, working to do something more than just build capability in their own institution, but it funded administrative support services to help institutions grow. A lot of times we think about, well, give them more money for research. What they really need is not just more money for research. They need more money for the administrative machinery to support that research. And we tend to sometimes forget about that. And the granted program was absolutely transformative. So it is now the realm of the possibility. And I think potentially for having folks argue for this to say, hey, how about a pot of money to help us move toward the new model, especially as you talked about the rural, the smaller institutions that don't have that resource. Maybe they need some help. And I think that would be kind of a cool thing to do, actually. And it's got precedent.
Thank you. Okay, now I think we have time. Maybe we're getting close to the end, but I think we can take maybe one or two more questions. This one also is getting more into the weeds about calculating. And this is from Laura McCabe, who was just unsure about how to calculate the dollar amounts for the regulatory compliance, like a more or RIS. How they're calculated for each grant. Should each lab track the hours dedicated to these areas? If a lab has more students, does that mean their grant budget should increase to account for the additional support? Or additionally, how are these calculations adjusted when the number of students or the level of annual grant support changes, which happens a lot now? And I'm finding it just a little bit of confusing, would appreciate some clarification.
So the way we've addressed these is really in a recharge center model. So it's the costs that are associated with those regulatory functions at your institution that can't be charged otherwise. So if you think about like animal care and use charges, you can't double count cage charges or per diems because you're charging those in other places. But the other cost of looking at reviewing ICOOC protocols and those kinds of things, you can calculate how much that is for your institution, and then basically stand up a recharge type of center for your institution for those charges and for those costs. And then that would be then if that protocol, if that proposal included animals, for instance, then you would apply that charge. On proposals that didn't use animals, you wouldn't apply that charge. And so, this is a pretty standard kind of calculation that we use in other ways. And we've also developed some more specific guidance that I think will be shared pretty soon, and more on how to implement these things. But really, each institution can take the lead for themselves on how as long as they can calculate and back up that these charges are real, they'll be able to stand up those recharge centers type models just like they do today on other areas.
Okay. And then I guess maybe for a final question is the impact on smaller institution? There has been a number of questions that kind of trying to understand how this is advantageous for smaller institutions when they're not in a position in the same level of making these investments, or they may not, it's less common for them to have these inter-unit charges like library services or animal care. And they'll have to like develop these now in this new model. So what kind of work or do you see the JAG team kind of doing to address how this is would be utilized for smaller institutions?
I think one answer at least is that the simple model is really designed to help institutions that don't have the depth of resources to work out some of the details. And it should, we think, based on the analysis that we've been able to do, should provide enough to cover the costs and we hope allow small institutions that want to grow and do more research begin to grow.
Thank you. Let's see, there are way too many questions that we can't answer all of them.
Folks will have another bite at the apple a week from today. We definitely want to encourage you to participate.
Right, that we're going to get to that. Or is there any question, Kelvin, that you had on your chart that was not addressed that you feel that your team should?
I think we hit pretty much everything, Joanne. Thank you. I will take one final look here and see if there's anything that we may have overlooked that folks would want to hear about. But I do think we covered a lot of ground there and a lot of excellent questions. Let's see here. Yeah, well, will the government accept and implement the FAIR model? That's one of them. People want to know, well, so where are we at with this? What's the timeline? We're working with Congress, working with the Senate, especially. We have bill language there. We've written a lot of language. We hope to get something in the fiscal 26 appropriations bill. That's only for a year, so we'll have to start working the authorizing side to have something that lives longer. And if there are tweaks that need to be made to the model, we'll have time to do that. So your continued input is super important still. So just to let you know, that's where we're headed. Like I said, we're continuing to meet with OMB and sharing, the details of our model more so with them. And so we're not sure how this will go, if it's a law, if it's some type of a rule that's put in place through the rulemaking process. I think I said we really prefer a law because we think that that's the way to get robustness and durability there. So that's kind of where we're at, and the timing would just, like I said, just continue to, when Congress comes back in September, continue to work with them, continue to talk about it, and hopefully get something in place where we can really start moving forward with this. So I think that's basically it. As I look at our list there, Joanne, I think we pretty much covered everything. That was the only one I would say we maybe didn't quite hit.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Okay, thank
thank
you.
you.
And before I, provide closing remarks, because I know we're about 5 minutes out, and I really appreciate all the members of JAG here, and Kelvin in particular, for being a part of this and to contributing to this discussion, and to all the participants for all of their questions. We will be consolidating all the questions and sharing them with the JAG team because this is part of a dialogue that they are having with the community. So you can be assured of that. And yes, it's just a reminder for those that may have joined a little later. This webinar is recorded and will be made available to the AAAS community. So again, please join me in thanking Kelvin and the members of the DAG team for sharing the FAIR model, and especially during this urgent time and science policy. And we're looking forward to keeping this conversation going. And as Kelvin has alluded to, AAAS will be hosting another webinar on this topic next Thursday, August 21st from 3:30 to 5, which will feature other JAG subject matter experts as well as AAAS CEO Sudha Parikh. And you'll be getting emails, stay tuned for that in terms of for those that want to register. But we'd really like to emphasize, for me in particular and AAAS, for those of you, you can still be engaged in many ways. And during this time, it's important for scientists to have a voice in a range of different policy topics before us, including the future of the research budget. And so we hope that you will utilize AAAS resources to kind of monitor what is happening in Congress and in the White House through our weekly newsletter, like the Policy Alert, our social media posts, but also to utilize other resources and materials and trainings that we have on our website related to how to organize a district visit, talking points, and how to have your voice heard with members of Congress, especially during the August recess. You can have district visits with members of Congress, so you can, share your stories about the importance of investing in research and development. But before we go and to close this seminar, as I mentioned, we're going to host another webinar next week. And so we would love to hear your thoughts about today's event and to get some feedback, not only for AAAS, but for the JAG team to help inform our next webinar. So we're going to be posting a poll just to get a sense of, are there specific issues that we should be digging into next time. So get ready to post the survey, or is that going to be shared? We'll be sending you that post.
It'll pop up on your screen as you leave.
Thank you.
Well, Joanne, if I could just add my thanks to you and the whole AAAS team behind the scenes for doing this extraordinary event. I really do appreciate it. And it's so great to see over 850 people attended. It means there's still hunger out there for a lot of additional detail. And we are absolutely happy to provide it, but also to take your input and get your thoughts and maybe some things that we haven't thought of. We really do value that and really are so grateful for you all taking time to participate here. And we do, as Joanne said very thoughtfully, encourage you to reach out to members of Congress to help them understand, what's at stake here. And if you support the model, tell them that. That would be very, very helpful. And if you don't, that's okay too. That's okay too. And if there are things that you're a little not quite sure about or whatever, we're here for you. And the JAG team members have been very gracious to say, hey, if you want to write me personally, I'll be happy to respond to you. If you want to get on a Zoom, they've been so incredibly helpful and giving of their time. And so if there's anything we can do to help you understand or address any questions or concerns you have, please let us know. But Joanne, thank you so much for your great work.
Thank you. Oh, well, you all did the heavy lifting, so thank you. And that concludes our deep dive today, and we hope to see